sure I've been watching the news since Saturday morning. The pain, the suffering that the Israeli people have gone through, I don't know the word other than horrific. When you see gunmen going door to door and looking to slit the throats of children and women and elderly, I think you have to go back to the Holocaust to see so many of our Jewish friends decapitated, murdered, all in one day. You have to look back to the Holocaust. So the only thing I can say is an Irish Catholic person that you'll say our hearts and minds and prayers go out to the people of Israel who are suffering as we gather here today. So if we could just begin by having a moment of silence for all the victims that we have witnessed this past weekend. And needless to say that I hope the Lord gives so much strength and comfort to our neighbors. With that, I do want to welcome all of you here. I want to thank Tom Kershaw, who is our landlord here, who always makes it a point to be here for our programs. And I want to thank him for what he does for the New England Council and just a terrific supporter. I also want to thank our friends at CMBG3 for graciously sponsoring this morning's program. And you're probably wondering, what in heaven's name is CMBG? It's really the first name of the individuals that formed the law firm, and they said rather than having the names of all of us on the business card, we just put the initials. So we want to thank them for their support of the New England Council day in and day out. It is a majority women-owned law firm, headquarters here in Boston. This morning we're delighted to be joined with the firm's CEO, someone that I've gotten to know pretty well, listening to her wonderful story and how she achieved what she has already achieved, which is extraordinary, and that's Jennifer Carson, who will introduce our guest in just a moment. Needless to say, the fall has gotten off to a very busy start here at the New England Council. We have more great events coming up in the next couple of weeks. Later this month, we will host a Capitol Hill program with House Minority Whip Catherine Clark on the 17th. We will be down in Rhode Island on the 23rd with Senator Sheldon Whitehouse. In Washington, D.C., we're looking forward to a Capitol Conversation breakfast with Congressman Chris Pappas on October 19th. And then, of course, we're counting down the days until the 23 annual celebration on the evening of October 26th, where we will celebrate 4 incredible New Englanders of the year. And as I indicated last week, we have just about 192 tables sold, which is extraordinary. And to all of you who have generously stepped up to the plate, thank you, thank you, thank you. And to the few people who may not be aware of the annual gathering and would like more information, you can go to our website, newenglandcouncil.com, or you can talk to Larry Zabar, who is here, and he will be more than happy to speak to you about opportunities to sponsor or take a table. So, but needless to say, we're delighted to welcome back a rising star in the New England Congressional Delegation, and that is Representative Jake Auchincloss. And for purposes of a very formal introduction, I am now pleased to hand it over to Jennifer Carson.
It's never easy following Jim Brett. But it is our privilege and honor to have the opportunity to sponsor this morning's NEC event. I want to thank personally Jim and Larry. Where's Larry? There he is. For giving us the opportunity to be here today and to speak to all of you. It is a privilege to be able to introduce the congressman. I want to explain a little bit about our firm. I am the CEO and managing partner, and as Jim mentioned, CMBG3s. Often we have clients who refer to us as the R2D2 firm and a bunch of other acronyms. We are a women-led firm, majority owned by women, started in Boston and based in Boston 7 years ago. We've been together, however, for nearly 20 years at a prior firm. We have offices in 5 places, 2 in California, 1 in Detroit, 1 in Providence, Rhode Island, and headquarters is in Boston. Our area of specialty is product liability and toxic torts. We do litigation, national litigation management, compliance, regulatory, and government relations just for very specific issues and clients. That has given us a huge platform nationally to understand each sector of the country and what happens and how we can service our clients best. Several years ago, we kept hearing about NEC, and we looked into it, and I have to say NEC is an impressive, incredible organization, and I think all of its employees, which seem like there are so much more, even though they're very small, considering what they accomplish, we find the personal attention that both Jim and Larry give us when we have questions about federal policy issues or any needs to meet or connect with anybody in the Boston area or New England area for that matter, has always been met with, what else can we do to help? They're an incredible organization. If you are new, and I met a few of you who are new, and today was your first meeting, you should really consider being a long-term member. It has been wonderful. Focusing now on our guest speaker today, it's an honor to introduce Congressman Jake Auchincloss. Congressman has served as a U.S. Representative for Massachusetts' 4th Congressional District since 2021. He sits on the Committee for Transportation and Infrastructure and Select Committee on Strategic Competition between the United States and China. His focus is on healthcare, clean energy, gun violence, and building a strong middle class. He was born and raised in Newton. After graduating from Harvard, he joined the Marines. He commanded infantry in Afghanistan and special operations in Panama. Upon his return, Jake continued his service as a 3-term city councilor in Newton while working at City Hall on nights and weekends. He built a career in business, running product development in both Fortune 100 insurance company and cybersecurity startup. He has degrees in economics and finance from Harvard and MIT Sloan. In addition, he told me to keep it short. So he's also a genuinely humble, wonderful person who's made some very impressive commitments on a very human level for all of our constituents. Please join me in welcoming Congressman Jake Auchincloss, New England Council President Jim Brett, for a fireside chat.
Here, Monday morning.
Thanks for having me.
No, thank you.
Good morning, everybody.
Obviously, we just begin by getting your reaction to what we've all been witnessing since Saturday.
It was probably Israel's worst day in its 75-year history. It's at war now. And while I think in the first 48 hours, America met the moment in a bipartisan outpouring of support for Israel and condemnation of Hamas for their atrocities. Not unanimous, but bipartisan and overwhelming. The real test for us is going to be in the next week or two, because we're going to see that Israel is going to be engaged in ferocious combat. And it's going to be ugly. I think the lesson of urban combat of the last 20 years, Syria, Ukraine, Iraq, is that the casualties and the suffering can be tremendous. And yet Israel has to reestablish military deterrence. It has to root out the nodes of terrorism within Gaza. It has to accomplish its military objectives. And we are going to need to steel ourselves as a country to stay in support of Israel as people start getting weak-kneed.
Are you surprised at some of the reaction from the left?
No. No, and I know there's a lot of hand-wringing about a couple of members of Congress and what they have said, and obviously we saw at Harvard what the student groups put their names to, a really depraved statement. The Democratic Party and certainly Congress remains in quite overwhelming support of Israel. We put Iron Dome on the floor, and I think it gets north of 400 votes. We put a statement of support for Israel a couple months ago on the floor. I think it got north of 420 votes. We put, and I think we will see this in the coming weeks, we put an aid package on the floor for Israel, and it'll probably get north of 400 votes. So there is going to be strong support for Israel in Congress. And I'm not particularly concerned from a strategic or diplomatic perspective what elected officials on the left are saying or doing. Here's where I am concerned, though. I am concerned about what's happening on college campuses, because those are going to be the decision makers of the next 10 or 15 years. And the misplaced sense of moral equivalence is eye-watering right now. And that is what makes it so concerning that the people we expect to imbue a moral education into these students, the faculty, the deans at Harvard and other universities, I think are missing the mark. We need to hear their voices and say, no, it's actually not a both sides issue. When you are dragging Jews out of their homes and murdering them, that side is wrong. And have the courage to make that statement. So we need to do better on our higher education campuses right now.
How can you put an aid package on the floor if you don't have a speaker?
You can't. It's not legal. It is yet another reason why we need the GOP to set aside its dysfunction and allow the lower chamber to work. We got two separate problems in both chambers right now when it comes to our military and diplomatic posture. In the upper chamber, the Senate is allowing one senator, Tuberville from Alabama, to hold up 300 military nominations. These are senior posts, including in the Indo-Pacific and in the Middle East, that are critically necessary for our contest against China and for our support of Israel. They're being embargoed by one individual, and there's this undue deference in the Senate to the power of one individual senator. I understand the Senate's parliamentary temperament, and I get that it's different than the House. It's meant to be the cream in the coffee, as George Washington said, and I think that's an appropriate function. It's meant to be protective of minoritarian perspectives. I think that's appropriate. There's a difference between moving slowly and deliberately and being paralyzed. And right now they are being paralyzed by one senator. I'm not talking about 5 or 10 or 20. I'm talking about one senator who's mad that female service members can access an abortion across state lines and is having a tantrum on the Senate floor and is frankly handing Xi Jinping and Hamas significant propaganda victories and strategic victories. In the House, we just can't do anything. I mean, and our version of Tommy Tuberville in the House is Matt Gaetz, who led a coup and has left us without leadership. And I would just fully support what the minority leader of the House Democrats, Hakeem Jeffries, has said, which is, we're here to help. Democrats kept the government open this fall. We prevented a debt default in the spring. We are clearly willing and able to send Democratic votes to help this country govern itself. And we are in the minority. We're not blind to the reality that we need Republican votes to pass stuff. What we are not going to do is feed into GOP dysfunction, because if we're just right back here again in 2 weeks, they elect some new speaker, and then there's another motion to vacate on the floor, then we're not actually helping the country. We need to have rules changes in the House that unlock bipartisan governance and isolate the extremists and the nihilists who just want to burn the whole place down, because we know that there are 350 votes right now for all the things we have to do. We can fund the 3 separate governments we have to fund right now: Ukraine, Israel, and America. We have the votes to do it all, but they have to grow up.
It does appear that the Congress right now is ineffective as well as impotent, in the sense that you don't have a speaker. to do any type of legislation at all. And you just mentioned about Senator Tuberville not only holding up, some of these military appointments, but we don't have an ambassador to Israel either.
That's right.
And that is being held up also, and which I think is unfortunate, to say the least. Talk about the lead up to the deposing of Speaker McCarthy. You were pretty strong on your views on Speaker McCarthy.
Yeah, that was quite a caucus meeting ahead of that vote. I think there were three interlocking considerations in the caucus meeting between Democrats as we decided our point of view on that impending vote. First off is that Speaker McCarthy didn't ask for help. So it's hard to work with somebody who not only refuses to ask for help, but actually goes on TV and disdains the very prospect of asking for help. Oh, I'm going to keep this thing with Republican votes only. The Democrats are, responsible for our problems right now. It's a very poor way to negotiate, is to not just not reach out your hand, but actually actively bat the hand away. Second consideration was, even if he had asked, there was no trust. And I know people think that in Congress we're all walking around stabbing each other in the back and lying to each other. It's actually not true. Members of Congress really rely on each other's word. Most deals are done, most compromises are made with a fairly large element of good faith that both sides are going to, mechanize that commitment. Speaker McCarthy had just gone bankrupt on the currency of trust. He said after January 6th, we're going to hold Trump to account. Within a week, he was in Mar-a-Lago bending his knee, and of course voted against the election results. He negotiated a bipartisan deal with President Biden to fund the government for the next year, which had overwhelming bipartisan support in Congress, backed away from it within a week again. He said he wasn't going to launch an impeachment inquiry without a vote on the House floor, backed away from that within a week. We have a trumped-up kangaroo court of an impeachment inquiry now in Congress. Just over and over again, he would make important statements. I'm not talking about the sort of play in the joints that any speaker kind of needs to band together a coalition. I'm talking about lies. And when you do that too many times, the other side, and frankly your own side, as we heard from his Freedom Caucus, just says, I actually can't negotiate with you because we're playing game theory tells me now that it's just not going to work. And then the final problem, let's say he had reached out, let's say we did trust him, was that even if he were going to be able to negotiate a deal in good faith with us, the rules that he had set up for himself, the deal with the devil that he made to get elected speaker, was such that we were going to be right back there within days. Within days. The one-person motion to vacate is a recipe for anarchy. The stacking of the Rules Committee with opponents of the speaker is a recipe for anarchy. They got to change that stuff. They have to change it. And I think what frustrates me is that constituents are watching what's happening and saying, oh my goodness, Congress is broken. Listen, Congress as an institution has all kinds of rules and conventions that are, bear consideration. But it's actually the Republican Party right now that has broken itself. We had the same margins last term, Democrats did, and we had the most productive bipartisan Congress in my entire lifetime. Infrastructure, gun safety, Electoral Count Act reform, aid to Ukraine, domestic semiconductor manufacturing support. Got a ton done, and did a lot of it with Republican votes.
The Republicans are meeting today in a caucus conference, and then tomorrow may be voting for a new speaker. There are two candidates, at least right now. Do you think tomorrow night there'll be white smoke coming out of the Capitol, and we have news? We have a new speaker. Do you think that is possible tomorrow, or do you think this is going to drag on?
Yeah. What I've heard from members of that conference is that those rooms are like the Patriots' locker room. They're pretty dejected right now because they realize that nobody can get the votes. And I don't even mean like can't get the votes as in they're at 210 and need 7 more. I mean like I think Scalise and Jordan, or neither one of them are breaking 150 right now if I had to guess. So they're a ways away. And as ever with that conference, it's the moderate Republicans. There are 18 Republicans who are representing Biden-won seats. And if you're one of those 18 Republicans and you vote for Jim Jordan or Steve Scalise, like, honestly, you deserve to lose that seat. Like, that is such a stupid political vote in my mind. You are asking to cave in to the hard right of your conference at every opportunity. Keep in mind that neither Jim Jordan nor Steve Scalise have ever really supported any of the compromises that Kevin McCarthy grudgingly made to keep things going over the last 9 months. I mean, these are people who are well to the right of Speaker McCarthy's, former Speaker McCarthy's predilections. So I do not think they're going to get there, but honestly, I've predicted the GOP conference wrong at almost every turn in the last 9 months, so I wouldn't bank on what I'm saying.
Do you think there'll be a third candidate emerge as a compromise?
Well, I think Speaker McCarthy is trying to do that right now. He gave a press conference yesterday that sure as heck sounded like he was...
He's seeking re-election. He made that statement.
Yeah, I think he's probably has a calculation that says both sides are going to exhaust themselves, realize that they can't make the math work. I don't think he's wrong that his floor is higher than the other two's floor. And he's going to kind of be there when everyone gets tired.
Mm-hmm. It's been reported that the caucus, the Democratic caucus, at the time of the vacating the chair, they were livid at Speaker McCarthy being on one of the talking shows on Sunday morning, Face the Nation, blaming the Democrats for the impasse. That put many of your colleagues over the top, saying, you know what, even if we thought of making a deal, even voting present, what he said about us can't work with them. So we're just going to watch them, eat themselves alive.
Yeah, I don't know that I think it goes back to the three kind of considerations. That folded into the second consideration, but really it was he didn't ask, so super hard to talk with somebody. No trust, even if he had asked, and then no changes that he could actually or would actually deliver, even if he had asked in good faith. So I think it was a waterfall of considerations from there.
The two candidates that are being discussed, Majority Leader Steve Scalise, he has indicated he'd support funding for Ukraine. Congressman Jordan said no more funding for Ukraine.
Yeah.
You've been pretty outspoken on the support for Ukraine. How do you think this is going to play out?
Yeah. I think, frankly, whoever is the speaker, if it is somebody who is wrangling those votes purely with Republican votes, purely with the rules package that they have now, I think it's going to be hard for them to bring a Ukraine aid standalone bill to the floor, which is devastating. It's amazing to watch a party fall as far as it has from the Reagan era. Ronald Reagan would be aghast to see a party go weak on Russia, the way that, not just weak, but downright sympathetic to Russia, and the way that the modern GOP has. And what is particularly noxious to me is that I'm on this China Select Committee, and it's a good committee, thoughtful members on the Republican side, but they continuously say how hawkish and tough they want to be on China while going weak-kneed on Russia. And there is a direct through line from the Kremlin to Beijing. Xi Jinping is watching extremely closely what happens in Ukraine as a test of Western willpower, as a test of our ability to use alliances, either in Europe or in East and South Asia, to fight back against the democracy versus autocracy contest of the 21st century. So this is not just a Eurasian issue. This is a global issue. And they are caving to what started off as really a relatively small minority of the GOP conference and has since started to devour more and more of their vacillators. There's a bunch of considerations right now in congressional leadership. One idea that I think could work is make the problem bigger. Sometimes when you get a problem that seems intractable, you make it bigger to try to solve it. And one thing we could do is tie Ukraine aid with Israeli aid with border security funding and basically say this is about security overall. This is a package for security and make it kind of unvote againstable in both chambers.
Yeah, I think I saw a count of almost 100 Republicans in the House that would not support additional funding for Ukraine.
Yeah.
So if that continues, and your option about a total security package, if you don't have anything like that, so what happens to Ukraine?
I will reiterate what President Zelensky has said when he visited the Capitol. This isn't my opinion. This is what he has said, is without the aid, Ukraine cannot win the war. And I say that if Ukraine loses that war, we'll be fighting another war.
Mm-hmm. You know, another issue that is affecting more than Texas, Florida, Arizona is immigration.
Yep.
And it's interesting to hear the comments from liberal Democrats. Eric Adams of New York, Mayor of Chicago, Governor Pritzker of Illinois, the Speaker of the House here, and other leaders, pretty hard on the administration, saying, hey, you got to give us some help. You were part of those discussions in the State House with the governor and legislative leaders, as well as your colleagues, saying that the administration needs to come up here, do an assessment, hopefully give us some relief in regulations, as well as give us some assistance in funding. Give us a little update on what is going on in that area.
Our immigration system's in crisis, and the border is not secure, and it is now destabilizing not just border states, but states throughout the nation. The president is doing a ton within the bounds of humanity and the law to address this problem. The governor is doing her utmost to address this problem. Mayors and select boards are doing their utmost to address this problem. It's Congress's fault. Congress owns this issue. For 30 years, Congress has failed to pass comprehensive immigration reform, not for lack of understanding what the fundamental compromise would be, but for lack of political deal-making to meet the moment. And a big part of it is that, frankly, a contingent within the GOP understands that this is their most potent issue to campaign on. And if you govern on it, you neutralize a pretty good vote galvanizing issue. Particularly going into an election year, do I think that the GOP is going to hand President Biden a win on the issue that is potentially most dogged to him? I think that would be a West Wing episode I would love to be a part of, and I'm unlikely to be. A second Biden administration could do it. And I'm a co-sponsor of legislation. The Dignity Act was put together by a Latina congresswoman from Texas, a Democrat, a Latina congresswoman from Florida, a Republican, and it's a compromise bill. I don't love everything in that bill. I'll be the first to say it, but it's a compromise bill. It's got tremendous border security funding. It has visa and asylum reforms that rationalize and make more predictable that system. It has a pathway to documentation and dignity for those who are living here, that it requires learning English and back taxes and civics education and becoming full-throated American citizens. It tries to stem from the root some of the poverty and crime that has plagued the countries of origin in Central America. It is a comprehensive bill. It does not have issues for farm workers I think would need to be addressed separately. It does not have some of the near-term work authorization issues that need to be addressed separately. But it's a comprehensive bill, and I think it would have the votes in the House and the Senate. But it's got to come to the floor. In the very near term, we need two things from the Biden administration. And the assessment team, I believe, is here today, in fact, from Homeland Security. We need to cut the red tape around work authorizations. And I was in Taunton at a manufacturing shop.
Mark Pacheco.
Talking to an employer who is so desperate for workers in their manufacturing floor that they want to pay people just to get trained. A mile down the road was a hotel filled with 300 migrant families, all of whom want to work, none of whom who have the permits to do so. That federal obstructionism is unacceptable. And Secretary Mayorkas is doing some things to make it move faster, but boy, we got to do more. And we're also going to need some money. The state's spending $45 million a month right now. That's not sustainable.
That piece of legislation that you mentioned, that you're a co-sponsor of, the immigration, I think it also talks about streamlining the path for dreamers.
Yes.
Which is very, very important, as well as granting immediately green cards to anyone who's been waiting for more than
10
10
years.
years.
Yep.
So, I mean, some interesting things in there. And I think you have something about protective status
Yep.
as well as in there. And you think that bill would pass if it came to the floor?
Yeah, I mean, I've never seen comprehensive immigration reform come to the floor, so it's hard for me to have a great antenna. But my strong sense is, you put something on there that has a pathway to citizenship for dreamers, that has root level reforms of our asylum and visa system, that has $25 billion for border security funding. That's a big, big middle of Congress that I think comes together around that.
Mm-hmm. Tell me, who are some of your friends on the other side of the aisle?
I've been impressed by the members on the China Select Committee. That was a hand-picked committee, small, put together by the Speaker and the Minority Leader. It's chaired by Mike Gallagher. He's a fellow Marine. He's from Wisconsin. He's done a thoughtful job on that committee. And there's a number of members there that I think have been very engaged. Dusty Johnson from South Dakota is an extremely thoughtful member and well-respected on his side of the conference. As with almost every profession, right? 10 to 20% kind of ruin it for everybody else. And you walk around the House floor, and most members are decent people trying to represent their districts in a high-fidelity way. But our primary system in this country is really, it's really squeezing a lot of the reasonableness out of the congressional debate, because 400 out of 435 members are anchored to their flanks. And I think that's particularly bad on the Republican side. One thing I've been surprised by is how paranoid so many Republican members are, not just about Tucker Carlson and Donald Trump, which I think we can all imagine, right? They care whatever they tweet affects them directly. They are really attuned to their talk radio hosts back home. A lot of them have rural districts. People are spending 2 to 4 hours a day in their car. A lot of times are on farm equipment listening to talk radio. These talk radio hosts have a very, very effective hold on their constituencies in a way that I think outmaxes Fox News, actually. And they really care about what these hosts are saying about their votes on the floor. We have nothing like that in the Democratic Party. There's no one medium that sort of grips the electorate in the same way, and I think that provides more latitude for negotiation.
Just putting your campaign Democratic hat on for a minute. You mentioned that the administration has such a impressive record of accomplishments. The infrastructure bill, the science bill, innovation bill, and yet the numbers of favorability in Congress is less than 20%. The president...
7%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
there are diseases that are more popular than that.
Yeah. The president's favorability on the border is 29%.
Yeah.
His numbers and favorability in the economy is less than 40%. Do you think there's just a poor communication from Congress, the administration, on all that has been accomplished? Because those numbers are pretty depressing.
Yeah, that's sort of that's kind of always where Democrats end up, right? It's, oh, we're doing a bad job at communicating it. Let me try to complicate that narrative a little bit. First of all, the president hasn't yet spent $1 billion telling people what he did. So let's wait until they put $1 billion to work across this country, particularly in the 5 states that are probably going to decide this election, telling people about infrastructure, telling people about semiconductor manufacturing and competing with China, telling people that we empowered Medicare to negotiate drug prices, polls above 80%, telling people about bipartisan gun safety legislation, polls above 70%. The president really hasn't started campaigning yet, and Donald Trump has done nothing but campaign for the last, 8 years. So I think we all need to just let this campaign actually ramp up, because they're going to have a ton of resources to go and tell the story. Number 2 is that we're just in a different era now than I think even Clinton and Bush operated under, where trust in our institutions is so low, trust in Congress, trust in science, trust in the presidency, trust in the military even is dipping below 70%.
Supreme Court.
Trust in the Supreme Court is dipping below 50%. that people start with an entirely different floor for approval. I mean, Abraham Lincoln could come in, and if he has an R next to his name, you lose 45% of the electorate. FDR could come in, he's got a D next to his name, you lose 45% of the electorate. So we're just a very, very tribal country right now, and I just think the approval ratings are it's very, very hard to have a through line historically. This is not Eisenhower and that era. So that's the second issue, and it's a separate conversation about how we got here and how societal trust has gotten so depleted, but it's a separate issue that needs to be addressed. But then finally, Democrats, we absolutely have to communicate. And part of that is going on Fox News. 50% of Fox News viewers are persuadable. It is just not true that Fox News is some echo chamber for only hard right opinion. 50% are either persuadable, lean Republicans, or they're just fully even Democrats. And it's particularly important for the 200,000 voters in those 5 states that I think are going to decide this presidential election, in Arizona and Nevada and Pennsylvania and Michigan. So at every opportunity, I'm on Fox News laying out our argument to contest their argument and also to try to build a little bit of credibility.
Mm-hmm. Fentanyl has become a leading cause of death for so many of our neighbors and friends and family members. I think 107,000 died from the overdose in 21. I know Congress has done some good work in passing laws, imposing more regulations on prescription drugs of opiate and providing grants to all of the states to help fight the epidemic. And I believe the administration has reached some type of an agreement with China to reduce manufacturing of certain fentanyls. Other things that need to be done that you feel is insufficient right now?
I mean, it's a 9/11 every day in this country for opioid overdoses. And you're right that the administration has tried to negotiate with China on their shipment of the APIs, the pharmaceutical ingredients behind fentanyl that they're shipping to Mexico. China's compliance with that, I would say, is sketchy at best, and that needs to be an area, I would argue, a top priority area for the Biden administration, on the sidelines with Xi Jinping in California potentially, and in the lower level, cabinet level meetings that I think we're going to start increasingly seeing now that we've established a floor under the relationship with China. We also need to recognize that there are 2 cartels in Mexico that have become, I think they're not gangs. They're international corporations, and we're going to have to potentially engage with them and against them directly. And I would draw the comparison to Pakistan after 9/11, in the sense that Pakistan was a pseudo-allied nation that was harboring actors that were a direct threat to the U.S. homeland. And we needed to use channels sometimes with and through the Pakistani government, and sometimes, frankly, in ways that pissed off the Pakistani government to address that. Can argue about the record of the last 20 years of doing so, but that was the thesis. And it's similar in Mexico. It's a difficult president in Mexico right now, not doing a lot of the things that we would hope to see in terms of rule of law there and in terms of cracking down on organized crime and drug trafficking. And so I think we're going to have to operate sometimes with and through and sometimes around. But it's a threat to the homeland.
You and your colleagues have a couple of more weeks before the magic date of November 17th to pass all 12 appropriation bills, or government is going to be shut down, or a continuing resolution might emerge. Your thoughts on whether you're going to meet the November 17th deadline?
I don't know, which is pathetic because the deal was already struck. There's no mystery here. The president and Speaker McCarthy negotiated a deal. It had very modest cuts to non-defense discretionary spending. It had an increase to military spending. Neither party much loved it. Both parties came together, and you had 30-something votes for it in the House and an even higher percentage in the Senate. We did the hard part. It happened. And then Speaker McCarthy flinched. And so it's going to be the same thing going into November. It's not a math problem. The votes are there right now for 12 appropriation bills at the levels agreed upon. The Senate's doing it, to their credit. The Senate's doing it exactly as they drew up. It's a MAGA problem. And this is why the House rules need to change. That is the unlock for everything else. Israel, Ukraine, United States, they have got to change these House rules and isolate these 10, 15 MAGA extremists.
Do you think there's a majority to do that on the Republican side?
I do think there's a majority on the Republican side to do that. I can't speak to how the dynamics of the conference get that to the floor or not, but I think a lot of them recognize that this is not good for their prospects in 24.
Do you see any movement on any bipartisan piece of legislation passing between now and the end of the Congress? We in the New England Council thought there might be some potential for the safe banking bill.
Yeah, that has been more Senator Schumer's issue, and he's got that.
I mean, it's passed the House 7 times, and it's passed the Senate committee last week. Do you think that's something that maybe people will say, you know what, long overdue, all New England states have decriminalized it, it's needed, banking community is looking for it?
It's possible. Senator McConnell really doesn't seem to like that bill, which is a major impediment. But to your point about bipartisan legislation, we just had a bill in the House on suspension, meaning that it was going to get 2/3 of the votes necessary, that had a couple of bills that I had worked on about lowering prescription drug prices through out-of-pocket cost reforms. And it was part of a package of bills around better transparency for hospital billing. And it was really, it was not earth-shattering, but significant legislation that was going to directly help patients. It had 2/3 of the votes necessary to pass. The day it was supposed to hit the floor, and I was watching very closely because my bill was in there, it got yanked down. And yanked down, I honestly think no explanation was ever really given that was cogent, other than I think Speaker McCarthy was just honestly afraid to do bipartisan legislation because of what his hard right flank would say about it. And if that doesn't tell you that we got to change the rules, I don't know what else would. 2/3 of Congress wants to do something and the Speaker won't do it.
I know I'm being told that we have to come to an end. I was just wondering, what was Jake Auchincloss doing in Ireland on the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, and what did you learn from that trip?
I was there in support of the Good Friday Agreement and was very proud to see that the Massachusetts delegation at the State House level was by far the best represented across all 50 states in the Union. There was about 200 or 220 or so state representatives and state senators from across the 50 states, and Massachusetts had fully 50 of them. It was awesome. And it was really a testament to the strong relationship between Massachusetts and Ireland. And I think the biggest learning I had is the incredibly dynamic economic relationship between Massachusetts and Ireland. Ireland, since the 1980s, has turned itself into a tech powerhouse, and its symbiotic trade and investment flows between New England and Ireland have been a huge part of that.
Well, with that, I want to thank the Congressman for a very informative and enlightening conversation. We thank him for not only being here today, but being accessible, approachable to all our members, because we hear it from so many of them go to Washington. They're able to meet with him, and we thank him. And he's got an awful lot on his plate, but he obviously has a good grasp on the issues. And I think what we'll also find out is that he's got to overcome his shyness, tell us how he really feels on some of these issues. But he's very, very frank, which is very refreshing to see. And needless to say, I often said that some people go to Congress to make a name. Jake Auchincloss is going to Congress to make a difference. So we want to thank him for today. You got a couple of pictures?
Love that.